The words hit him like a physical blow, each syllable dripping with a contempt that had nothing to do with his record and everything to do with the color of his skin. "You'll be on latrine duty," Captain William Hartman declared, his voice flat, as if he had just assigned a task to a mere tool, rather than a soldier trained to fight. The room fell silent, the air thick with the tension of the unspoken disdain that filled the space. The briefing room, tucked within a forward operating base in Italy, 1944, was a cacophony of clashing emotions, the walls lined with maps and the smell of sweat mingling with gunpowder. Lieutenant Elijah Carter stood rigid, his heart pounding in his chest. He was young, barely 20, yet the years of training had molded him into a capable soldier. His hands were steady as he gripped the edge of the table, but inside, a storm raged. Around him, the faces of his peers were painted with disbelief and derision, but Captain Hartman's gaze lingered on him with a dismissive indifference. Elijah could feel the weight of their scrutiny, an unspoken agreement that he was the least worthy among them. The injustice stung. It felt like a slap across the face. Elijah's throat tightened as he glanced at Private Tommy Nguyen, who sat nearby, his expression a mix of concern and sympathy. Tommy was Vietnamese-American, a fellow soldier who had faced his own battles against prejudice. He met Elijah's gaze and gave a slight nod, a silent promise of solidarity. But the captain's words echoed, and Elijah felt the sting of isolation deepen. "Prepare for a mission briefing," Hartman continued, ignoring Elijah entirely, as if the young lieutenant's hard-earned skills and bravery weren't worthy of respect. Instead, he turned to the others, outlining plans for a strategic offensive against a Nazi battalion rumored to be advancing toward their position. Elijah clenched his fists, feeling the anger rise within him. He had trained harder than most, had outperformed many during exercises at Camp Walters, yet here he was, relegated to the tasks meant for the lowest of privates. The injustice was palpable, and he could see it reflected in the eyes of his comrades. Some looked away, others wore smug smiles. It was as if they relished the opportunity to see him fail, to confirm the deeply ingrained biases they held. In that moment, Elijah's resolve hardened. He could either accept this role, this indignity, or he could fight against it. As the briefing continued, Elijah's thoughts spiraled into memories of his life before the war. He could still hear the laughter of his younger siblings, the warm embrace of his mother, who had always urged him to rise above the hatred of the world. In his breast pocket, a letter from her, crumpled and worn, reminded him of that promise. Come home safe. He had to keep that promise, not just for her, but for himself. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted as the radio crackled to life. "Reinforcements are 20 minutes out. Hold your position." The urgency in the voice sent a jolt through the room. 20 minutes, that was all they had. The captain's earlier dismissal of him felt even more like a betrayal now, with lives on the line. As the men around him began to discuss their strategies, Elijah felt the weight of their expectations. He was determined to prove himself, but the odds seemed impossibly stacked against him. Before we continue, let us know in the comments. Have you ever felt underestimated because of who you are? Share your story below. We want to hear from you, and together, let's create a community that supports each other in our struggles. Now, back to Lieutenant Elijah Carter. As the briefing wound down, Captain Hartman turned his back on Elijah, dismissing him as if he were nothing more than a shadow. That moment of isolation was a bitter reminder that in this war, the battle was not just against the enemy, but against the prejudice that still lingered in the hearts of those he fought alongside. Elijah's heart raced as he listened to the plans being laid out. He felt the weight of expectation growing heavier, pressing down on him like a physical burden. He glanced at Tommy, who had been watching him with an intensity that spoke of unspoken camaraderie. "You ready for this?" Tommy whispered, his voice low but steady. Elijah nodded, though doubt crept into his mind. Would he be left behind once again? Would he find himself fighting for respect in a battle that had nothing to do with the enemy? As the men filed out of the room, Elijah lingered for a moment, staring at the maps that depicted the land they were about to traverse. The ticking clock echoed in his mind, each tick a reminder of the urgency of the situation. He took a deep breath, trying to quell the storm of emotions raging within him. Despite the challenges ahead, he felt a flicker of determination ignite. He would find a way to prove himself, to show them that he was more than just the color of his skin. The battle ahead loomed like a dark cloud, and Elijah knew that the fight would be more than physical. It was a fight for recognition, for dignity, and for the right to stand among his peers as an equal. As he stepped out of the briefing room, the weight of the world on his shoulders, he made a silent vow to himself. He would not let fear define him. He would rise to the occasion, no matter the cost. As the tension of the briefing room lingered in the air, Elijah Carter clenched his fists, fighting back the rush of anger that threatened to spill over. He could feel the eyes of his peers upon him, some filled with pity, others with disdain. The weight of their expectations hung heavy, each man weighing the value of his life against the color of his skin. Deep down he wanted to scream, to demand that they see him as more than what they had been conditioned to believe. But the words lodged in his throat, choked by a sense of futility. Private Tommy Nguyen, his closest ally in this hostile environment, caught Elijah's eye, offering a slight nod of support. Tommy was one of the few who acknowledged Elijah's capabilities, but even he had to navigate the treacherous waters of their battalion's prejudices. "Don't let it get to you, Eli," Tommy whispered as they stepped out of the briefing room, the echoes of Hartman's dismissive tone still ringing in their ears. "You know what you can do." Elijah forced a smile, but felt the familiar sting of doubt creep in. With every mission that passed, he was reminded of how deeply entrenched the biases of the army ran. His heart raced as he thought of the upcoming operation to secure the bridge, a mission that could change the course of the war. But how could he prove himself when Hartman had already dismissed him? The thought was suffocating. The buzz of the camp faded into the background as Elijah's mind raced. He needed to take action, to show everyone that he was more than just a black soldier in a white man's army. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the rugged landscape, reminding him that time was running out. They had to secure the bridge before dawn, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this might be his only chance to earn the respect he craved. As they walked toward the armory, a sudden sense of urgency gripped him. "Tommy," Elijah began, his voice low but steady, "I overheard some of the guys talking. They think a Nazi battalion is moving in on us tonight." Tommy frowned, his brow furrowing. "You sure? That's a big claim, Eli. I'm telling you, I heard them in the mess hall. If we don't act fast, we'll be overrun before sunrise." Elijah's voice held a fervor that surprised even him. He felt the weight of responsibility settle over his shoulders like a heavy coat. "But what can we do? Hartman won't listen to you," Tommy said, a hint of concern in his voice. "You know he'll just brush it off." "I have to try." Elijah's resolve hardened. They had to warn the others, even if it meant facing Hartman again. The thought sent a wave of dread through him, but the urgency of the situation drowned it out. They hurried towards the command tent, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with anxiety and the smell of burnt coffee. Soldiers shuffled about, checking their gear and discussing strategies, their voices a low murmur that rose and fell like the tide. Elijah approached Captain Hartman, who was hunched over a map, oblivious to the tension radiating from his subordinate. "Sir," Elijah began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling within him, "I need to speak with you about the mission." Hartman glanced up, his expression unreadable. "What is it, Lieutenant?" "There's a possibility of a Nazi battalion moving towards us. I heard it from some of the men. We have to prepare—" "Enough!" Hartman cut him off, his eyes narrowing. "You're not a strategist, Carter. I have this under control. You need to focus on your duty." The dismissal stung. Elijah's heart sank, but he pressed on. "With all due respect, sir, I believe we need to take this seriously. If we don't act, we could lose everything." A cold silence enveloped the tent, as every soldier turned to witness the exchange, their eyes flickering between their captain and the lieutenant who dared speak out. The weight of their scrutiny was suffocating. "You want to prove yourself?" Hartman snapped, his voice laced with derision. "Do your job and stop wasting my time." Elijah felt the flush of humiliation rise to his cheeks as Hartman's words echoed in the tent, a cruel reminder of his place in the hierarchy. The injustice of it all made his stomach churn. He glanced at Tommy, who stood beside him, a mix of anger and disbelief etched on his face. "Let's go, Eli," Tommy urged, sensing the tension crackling in the air. But Elijah stood rooted in place, a flicker of determination igniting within him. He couldn't let this happen. Not again. He had to take a stand. "Captain, I will not sit idly by while my men are put in danger," he declared, his voice gaining strength. "I have a responsibility to protect them, regardless of what you think of me." For a moment, a charged silence lingered, and Elijah felt the ground shift beneath him. The soldiers around them exchanged glances, some nodding in silent agreement, while others looked away, unwilling to engage. The weight of their unspoken support surged within him, fueling his courage. "Do you want to be court-martialed, Carter?" Hartman's voice was cold, but the flicker of uncertainty in his gaze didn't escape Elijah's notice. "I'd rather be court-martialed than see my brothers die because of ignorance," Elijah replied, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the eyes of his peers on him, their expectations hanging in the air like a heavy fog. "Enough!" Hartman shouted, slamming his fist against the table. "You will do as you're told." With that, he turned away, dismissing Elijah as if he were nothing more than an inconvenience. The finality of the captain's words hit Elijah like a physical blow. Defeated, he stepped back, the collective disappointment of his fellow soldiers weighing heavily on his shoulders. As they left the tent, Tommy placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You did what you could, Eli. They'll have to see the truth soon enough." Elijah nodded, but doubt gnawed at him. What if they didn't? What if time slipped away and the Nazis arrived before they could prepare? The fear of failure loomed large, a dark shadow that threatened to engulf him. And yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of red and orange, he felt an ember of defiance ignite within him. He would not let this moment define him. Later that night, as the battalion settled into a restless quiet, Elijah found himself alone, staring out into the darkened landscape. The stars twinkled above him, distant and unyielding, much like his dreams of respect and honor. In his breast pocket, he felt the familiar crinkle of his mother's letter, a reminder of the promise he had made to return home safe. "Come home safe," she had written, her words etched into his mind. He couldn't let her down. He wouldn't let Hartman or anyone else dictate his worth. The plan was forming in his mind, fueled by the urgency of time. He would gather whoever would stand with him, rally the men who believed in him, and prepare for the battle ahead. "Tommy," he whispered into the night, calling out to his friend, who soon appeared at his side, concern etched on his face. "We need to talk." "What's going on?" Tommy asked, his eyes scanning the darkness. "I have a plan. We can't just sit back and wait for them to come. I want to gather the men, the ones who believe in us, and prepare for the worst. We can't let Hartman's arrogance be our downfall." A spark of determination ignited in Tommy's eyes. "I'm with you, Eli. We'll show them we're more than what they think." As they began to gather their comrades, a sense of purpose filled the air. The camaraderie that had formed among them strengthened Elijah's resolve. He could feel the heartbeat of a new mission pulsing through him. They were not just soldiers, but brothers ready to fight against the injustice that had long overshadowed their worth. The clock ticked on, a relentless reminder that dawn would soon break. With each passing moment, the urgency grew. They had to be ready to face whatever awaited them, together. Before we continue, let us know in the comments how you would handle being underestimated in a critical situation. Your stories matter, and they inspire others. Now back to Elijah as he prepares for the fight of his life. The air was charged with an electric intensity as dawn broke over the battlefield, the first rays of sunlight cutting through the dense fog that clung to the ground like a shroud. Lieutenant Elijah Carter stood at the edge of the ridge, heart racing, his breath coming in quick bursts. The distant rumble of artillery echoed through the valley, a grim reminder of the chaos that awaited. He clenched his fists, the rough fabric of his uniform biting into his skin, grounding him in the moment despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside. "Elijah, are you sure about this?" Private Tommy Nguyen's voice broke through the cacophony of distant gunfire, laced with concern. The young Vietnamese-American soldier stood beside him, his brow furrowed, eyes darting toward the horizon where the enemy was rumored to be advancing. Elijah turned to Tommy, his resolve hardening. "We have to warn the others. If we don't act now, they'll be caught off guard. He could feel the weight of responsibility settling heavy on his shoulders. Every second counted. Reinforcements were due to arrive soon, but if they didn't act quickly, lives would be lost. But only moments earlier, Captain Hartman had fled, a coward in a captain's uniform, leaving them to face the oncoming storm. The image of Hartman's pale face as he bolted from the briefing room haunted Elijah. The captain had been the embodiment of authority, yet when faced with the reality of battle, he had turned tail, proving that his bravado was a mere facade. In that moment of betrayal, Elijah's anger flared. It ignited a fire within him, a fierce determination to prove that he was more than what Hartman and the others believed. They had treated him as an afterthought, a mere footnote in their plans, but now with lives at stake, he had a chance to take command. Taking a deep breath, Elijah looked at Tommy, who nodded, his expression shifting from doubt to a fierce loyalty that ignited a spark of hope within Elijah. "Let's go," Elijah said, his voice steady. They dashed down the slope, the sound of their boots muffled by the soft earth, hearts pounding in sync as they hurried to warn their comrades. As they reached the makeshift encampment, the chaos was palpable. Soldiers hustled to prepare defenses, their faces painted with fear and uncertainty. Elijah's presence commanded attention, a flicker of surprise sparking in the eyes of those who had previously dismissed him. "Listen up," he shouted, his voice cutting through the din. "The Nazis are on the move. We need to secure our position before they get here." A sharp look from Sergeant Mitchell, a burly soldier with a reputation for being tough but fair, met his gaze. "You think you can just take charge? Last I checked, you were on latrine duty." The words were tainted with the same contempt Elijah had felt in the briefing room, but this time he didn't flinch. Elijah stepped closer, his pulse thrumming in his ears. "I may not be your captain, but I can lead. We all know what's at stake. If we don't prepare, we'll be slaughtered. I'm asking you to trust me." The sergeant's jaw tightened, a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. The tension in the air thickened, a standoff brewing between them. But as they all took a moment to look at Elijah, really look at him, they could see the fire in his eyes, the passion and determination. "All right, Lieutenant," Mitchell relented, his tone grudging but respectful. "What's the plan?" Elijah felt a swell of pride, a rush of adrenaline that propelled him forward. "We need to set up defensive positions along the ridge, use the terrain to our advantage. If we can hold them back until the reinforcements arrive, we might stand a chance." The soldiers rallied around him, their skepticism slowly melting away as they began to follow his lead. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Elijah could feel the tide shifting, the power of unity igniting something deep within him. The weight of responsibility and the promise of leadership surged through him as he organized the troops, pointing them to their posts, issuing commands with a confidence he hadn't known he possessed. As they fortified the ridge, the distant sound of marching boots grew louder, a steady rhythm that echoed in Elijah's chest. He felt the palpable tension rise, a brewing storm that mirrored the chaos within him. The soldiers around him were anxious, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. He could feel their eyes on him, searching for reassurance, for strength. But just as he was about to give a rousing speech, a rumble erupted in the distance. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the air filled with the acrid scent of gunpowder. "They're here!" someone shouted, panic rising in their voices as figures emerged from the fog. Nazi soldiers, a battalion marching with ruthless determination. Elijah's heart raced as adrenaline coursed through him. "Positions!" he yelled, his voice slicing through the chaos. The soldiers scrambled into place, weapons raised, fear morphing into fierce resolve. Elijah took his own position, rifle steady in his hands, his heart pounding a war drum in his chest. The first shots rang out, a brutal symphony of chaos, the crack of gunfire, the deafening explosions, the cries of men caught in the maelstrom of battle. Elijah's instincts kicked in, his training taking over as he aimed and fired, each shot a release of pent-up frustration and fury. The world around him blurred into a haze of smoke and noise, but he remained focused, his thoughts sharp as he directed his men. "Keep your heads down," he shouted, ducking as bullets whizzed past. The air was thick with the stench of sweat and fear, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. He could hear the cries of the wounded, but he pushed the sounds aside, focusing on the task at hand. Just as they began to gain ground, a sudden explosion rocked the ridge. The shockwave knocked Elijah off his feet, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Dazed, he pushed himself up, blinking against the haze of smoke that surrounded him. The battlefield was chaos. Men were shouting, some were down, and the once solid line of defense was beginning to falter. "Lieutenant, we're losing men." Tommy's voice broke through the din, panic threading through his words. Elijah's heart sank as he scanned the scene, realizing the reality of their situation. They were outnumbered, and the relentless advance of the Nazis threatened to engulf them. Determination surged through him. "We can't let them break our line. We have to hold." Just as he rallied himself to push forward, a shadow fell over him, and the unmistakable sound of a grenade pin being pulled sliced through the air. Elijah's blood ran cold as he turned. Time seemed to slow as he saw it. A grenade spinning through the air, destined to land amidst his men. Instinct kicked in. He could either dive to save himself or throw himself onto the grenade, sacrificing his life for those whom he had just begun to lead. Panic surged, a wild storm of emotion. But in that moment, the weight of his decision crystallized. He thought of Tommy, of the faces of the soldiers who had begun to believe in him, of the life he had fought for before the war. He couldn't let fear dictate his actions. With a surge of adrenaline, Elijah lunged forward, arms outstretched, reaching for the grenade. The world exploded around him, and for a brief moment he felt suspended in time, caught between the past and the uncertain future. He threw himself down, the ground rushing up to meet him. The impact was fierce, the blast obliterating everything in its wake. Pain erupted through his body, a searing agony that swallowed him whole. Darkness closed in, and for a heartbeat, he thought he had failed his comrades, failed himself. But as the smoke began to clear, he felt warmth spreading, not just from the wound, but from the voices of his comrades rising above the chaos. "Lieutenant, get up, we need you!" Elijah gasped, pulling himself from the fog of pain, fighting against the darkness that threatened to pull him under. He blinked, the world coming into focus, the battle raging on around him. The soldiers were rallying, inspired by his sacrifice, his bravery igniting a fire within them. As he struggled to his feet, he realized that he had not only saved their lives, but had finally found his own. The surge of pride surged through him, lifting him from the depths of despair. And in that moment, he understood that he had become the leader he had always aspired to be. The twist of fate that had once cast him aside had turned into a force for change. The captain's cowardice had paved the way for Elijah's courage to shine. As the battle raged on and the tide began to shift, Elijah felt a sense of peace wash over him amid the chaos. He was no longer just a soldier defined by his skin color. He was a commander, a brother in arms, fighting for something greater than himself. Victory was within reach, and he would not let it slip away. The battalion would remember his name, not as the black lieutenant who fought alone, but as the man who led them to triumph against overwhelming odds. He charged back into the fray, determination ignited in his chest, ready to fight not just for survival, but for the legacy that was unfolding before him. The battle was far from over, but he was ready to face it head-on, no longer fleeing from the shadows of doubt. The world around him faded again, but this time he was not afraid. This time he was ready. The battlefield was eerily quiet, the air charged with the aftermath of chaos. Lieutenant Elijah Carter stood among the remnants of what had been a fierce fight. Smoke curled into the sky, mingling with the sharp tang of gunpowder that still lingered, a bitter reminder of the battle they had just endured. He gazed around at the weary faces of his fellow soldiers, men who had once looked at him with skepticism, now wearing expressions of respect and gratitude. Elijah's heart raced, not from the adrenaline of combat, but from a sense of profound change. Moments ago, he had been just a young black lieutenant, overlooked and underestimated. But now, he had become something far greater, a leader. The chaos of the battle had forced him to rise, to seize command when Captain Hartman had fled in fear, leaving Elijah to forge a path through the enemy lines. "Lieutenant Carter," Private Tommy Nguyen stepped forward, his eyes wide with admiration. "You saved us back there. I don't know how you did it." Elijah shook his head, still processing the whirlwind of events. "I didn't do it alone, Tommy. We fought together, we all did." His voice was steady, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. He had taken risks, made decisions that could have cost them dearly. Yet, in every moment of uncertainty, he had felt their lives intertwined with his, pulling him from the brink of doubt to a place of strength. As they began to gather their fallen comrades, the somber reality of war settled in. Elijah's gaze fell on a fellow soldier, a young man with dreams that would never be realized. They had laughed together just days before, sharing stories of home and hopes for the future. Now that laughter echoed in the void, a haunting reminder of the price they had all paid. "Do you think the captain will come back?" Tommy's voice broke through his thoughts, tinged with both hope and skepticism. Elijah inhaled deeply, the acrid scent of smoke filling his lungs. "I don't know. But what I do know is that we can't let fear dictate our actions. We have to stand tall together no matter what." With that, Elijah stepped forward, turning to face the remaining soldiers. "Listen up," he called, his voice carrying over the quiet murmur of their grief. "Today we face something unimaginable. But we fought bravely and we survived. We showed them what we're made of, and we will continue to show them." His words ignited a spark in the group, their faces lifting with newfound resolve. As they began to regroup, Elijah felt a sense of purpose wash over him. He was no longer just a soldier fighting for recognition. He was fighting for his brothers beside him and for the memory of those they had lost. He knew that the scars left behind would always remain, but they would serve as a reminder of their strength and resilience. In the days that followed, news of their success spread through the ranks. The higher-ups took notice, and Elijah found himself being called into meetings where his opinions were sought, where his leadership was recognized. Captain Hartman returned, eyes wide with disbelief, as he learned what Elijah had accomplished in his absence. There was no denying it. The men rallied behind him and the tides of respect began to shift. "Lieutenant Carter," Hartman said, a hint of reluctance in his voice, "I must commend you on your actions. You did well out there." Elijah met the captain's gaze, the weight of the past hanging between them. "Thank you, sir. But respect is earned, not given. I hope we can work toward that." The captain nodded, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Elijah's heart swelled with determination. He had taken the first step toward changing the narrative, not just for himself, but for those who would follow in his footsteps. As the war continued to rage, Elijah became a symbol of hope and resilience among the ranks. He led his men with courage and empathy, ensuring that every voice was heard. He mentored young soldiers, reminding them that their worth was not determined by the color of their skin, but by their character and their resolve. One evening, as they gathered around the fire, Elijah pulled out a letter from his mother, worn and frayed from being read countless times. "She always told me to come home safe," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I realize now that it's not just about surviving. It's about living with purpose, fighting for one another, for justice and for what we believe in." The men nodded. Their spirits lifted as they shared their own stories of dreams and aspirations. They were no longer just a battalion, they were a family, bound together by shared struggles and victories. As the war drew to a close, Elijah stood on the precipice of a new beginning. The medals he earned felt heavy, not from the weight of glory, but from the responsibility of carrying forth the stories of those who had fought alongside him. He vowed to ensure their sacrifices were never forgotten. Elijah's journey became a testament to the power of resilience and the strength found in unity. He knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but he faced it with unwavering resolve, emboldened by the lessons learned in the heat of battle. "The fight is far from over," he reminded his men. "We have a responsibility to continue standing up against injustice, to be the voice of those who are silenced." As he concluded his speech, he noticed the glimmer of determination in their eyes. This was the legacy he would leave behind, a commitment to justice, equality, and the belief that every soldier, regardless of their background, deserved to be seen and heard. Elijah Carter's story was just the beginning, and it was a story that needed to be told. If you found inspiration in Elijah's journey, join us in sharing these powerful narratives. We believe every story matters, and there are countless more like his that need to be told. If you believe in the fight for justice and the importance of history, subscribe to our channel. Become part of our community, and let's continue to amplify these voices together. We'll see you on the next mission.